Shana Tova, my friends. Wow, I never thought I would be doing this, to record a sermon before the high holidays for you to upload and watch in the comfort of your home instead of the sanctuary. What a strange and unique year. I asked my wife what to say at today's sermon. Being such a sensitive time, what and how should I present my message? My wife, who's full of wisdom, answered, "Don't be too witty. Do not try to be too smart, funny, or deep. Don't try to be too intellectual or humorous or inspiring. Just be yourself." It was the exact message I needed to hear from the one who knows me best in this world. So friends, let me try to be myself and talk about what happens when the self is stripped to its bareness. This year, what a year it has been, filled with stress, anxiety, loss and confusion, and also some good humor. A friend of mine sent out a clip. He said, this was the first time in history that we can save the human race by laying in front of the TV and doing nothing. Let's not mess this up. Another clip that was going around, it said, I stepped on my scale this morning and it said, please use social distancing, one person at a time. Or how about the other guy who came for a job in 2030 and the boss tells him, hey, there's a gap in your resume. What were you doing in 2020? I was washing my hands, he says. Or this clip. To everyone that sang last year the popular Israeli folk song, next year we will sit on the porch and count migrating birds. Well, your wish has been fulfilled. Aren't you satisfied? Friends, these are deeply vulnerable moments in our history, as a nation and as individuals, and none of us are immune. These are the times, to quote Thomas Paine, that tries men's souls. Over the last year and a half, we have all been tested. Our ordinary life flow has been interrupted, and the future is uncertain. We saw illness, death, financial instability, mental instability, loneliness, stress, anxiety, and depression. As the consistency and institutions we all relied upon went on lockdown, everyone took a hit. So today I would like to talk to you about one person who is one of the most famous, wisest, and powerful men who ever lived. And his life also took a turn. You see, friends, many kings ascended the thrones of Israel. None of these kings, however, obtained the power and prestige that King Solomon did. His wisdom, his fame, and richness were unparalleled. Solomon extended the domain of Israel from the Red Sea on the south to the Euphrates River on the north. And he was considered the wisest man who ever lived, but it did not last. At the end of Solomon's reign, Israel became spiritually bankrupt. Deterioration and strife were everywhere. And within a year of Solomon's death, the land was divided into two kingdoms. The Talmud describes it in tragic terms. Initially, Solomon ruled over the supernal worlds, but ultimately, he ruled only over the lower worlds. The rabbis tell us, finally, he ruled only over the Jewish people, yet then he lost that too. And then he ruled only over the city of Jerusalem. But then he even lost that too. And ultimately, he ruled over only his own bed. And then he even lost that. And at the end, he ruled only over his own staff. Solomon lost everything. All he had control was his own stick. Yet there's something strange. How can Solomon be a king over his stick? I mean, you can rule over a nation, a country, but how could you be a king over your own stick? And the Talmud, my friends, is teaching a very profound lesson here. That when I am stripped of my outer success stories, when I confront my own inner vulnerability and loneliness, and when I have nothing left but my stick, what is left? Who am I? That's a question we all need to answer sooner or later. And my answer at some point in my life might be, I'm a businessman, I'm a lawyer, I'm a carpenter, I may be a doctor, a teacher, a real estate agent, a stockbroker, or just a student, a politician, a celebrity, a scientist, or maybe a shlemazel or a shlemiel, or the most famous of the Jewish professions, a therapist. But truly, who am I when all that is gone? Who am I when the circumstances disrobe me of all of my facades and layers and I'm laid bare? Who am I when my marriage might be crumbling, my kids rebelling, my finances unstable, and my anxiety soaring? Friends, it is at that moment when you figure out who you really are inside your core. Are you a beggar or are you royal? Are you a victim or are you a prince? King Solomon was a king over his stick, states the Talmud. For Solomon remained the same royal king when he had nothing but a stick to call his own. And just as when he was dwelling in Jerusalem's palace, with hundreds of thousands of subjects, as one of the richest and most powerful men on the planet, because royalty is an inner state of being. It is who you are, not what you do. It is how you see yourself, not how others see you. Royalty, true royalty, is the awareness that I am not my job, I am not my success, I am not my money, I am not my physical prowess, I am not my intellectual brilliance, I am not my vacation spots or my beautiful home or the control I have. True, yes, I appreciate all of the above, but it is not who I am. So you may ask, who am I? I am a piece of infinity. I am a fragment of God, a piece of Hashem sent down as a co-creator to this world to bring light and goodness into every situation I encounter. I am, at every moment, an ambassador of the divine who sent me into this situation in order to fulfill his will and be a conduit for his purpose. I am never trapped. I am not a helpless victim. I am a divine agent to bring light and meaning and goodness into every situation that I find myself in. I am always free because I do not see myself as a controller. For people who must control others and must control situations are never free. They are at the mercy of the things that they often cannot control. But people who need not control anything or anyone are always free because they create each moment through their vision, their attitude, and their behaviors. I may own merely a stick, but I am a king because I see myself as a servant of the Almighty, a conduit for his infinity, a channel for his royalty, an agent of his compassion, and a channel for his love. And even when there is pain, confusion, uncertainty, I never despair. I am always empowered. They tell the story of a 90-year-old Jew who's hiding in the attic as the Tsar's police come searching for all young, able men who escaped the Russian draft. Old, clumsy, and frail, he can't really hide. And the policeman sees him and he says to him, "Old man, why are you hiding?" And the old man says, "Officer, I really don't want to be drafted in the Tsar's army. I am old, I am weak." The officer replies, "Of course not. You think the Tsar wants people your age serving as soldiers in the army? Why do you think he would draft someone as old like you?" And this Jew responds, "Well, does the Tsar also not need generals?" Friends, that is what we do on Rosh Hashanah. When we coronate God as our king, and we coronate the king inside of us, the divine core that constitutes our essence. For if I am king, then it's always temporary, as long as I can wear the garb and play the game. But if God is king, then I always remain a king, under all circumstances, for my core is aligned with the divine infinity inside of me. I'd like to share with you a story. A story I heard about a man by the name of Isaac Godinger, a successful New York businessman. A few months ago, just before Passover, in March of 2020, his mother Rita, a regal matriarch in her early 70s, who raised a beautiful, kind, and noble family, started to experience shortness of breath, even though she and her husband had been in full quarantine already for 4 weeks. It was the night of the Seder. Isaac led an expedited first Seder with his family, and as soon as the Seder came to a close at the Afikoman, and the Afikoman was eaten, he told his family to carry on without him. He had to go check on his mother. As he hurried to his parents' apartment, he found her struggling with every breath. Isaac rushed his mother to Cornell Medical Center, one of New York's finest hospitals. Indeed, one of the country's leading hospitals. Isaac managed to persuade a sympathetic medical worker to allow him to stay with his mother until the morning. But as she went off duty, he was quickly expelled from the hospital premises due to the strict policy that no relatives were allowed in hospitals lest they are carriers of the coronavirus. Wow, what was he going to do? It was just before the second Seder, Isaac received a call from his mother that the doctors were very anxious about her condition. They wanted to place her into an induced coma and put her on a respirator. Now, Isaac is a member of the Hatzalah. He was an EMT. He was frantic, and for good reason. For during those early weeks, the death toll in New York of the coronavirus was mind-staggering. Scores of people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s went into the hospitals and came out lifeless. There was a shortage of nurses and doctors, a shortage of beds, equipment, and most importantly, a shortage of knowledge. They were doing the wrong things for many of the patients. And even with the best intentions, the hospital simply could not deliver. And one of the saddest things was that so many of the elderly died alone with no loved ones to hold their hands and bid farewell. And now Isaac faced this same horror with his mother. How, he thought, can I allow my regal mother, the queen of our family, just be there alone? Isaac pleaded with the hospital officials. He assured them he would undergo every test and not leave her room till she leaves the hospital. But Cornell would not budge, stating, policy is policy. But when you are blessed with a mother who teaches you about your inner nobility, notwithstanding your circumstances, you come up with ideas. Isaac researched and discovered that Cornell had a long-standing contract with a company that supplies personal nursing care at an astronomical price. So he approached the owner of the company and begged him to provide him with credentials as a nurse so that he could be admitted to his mother's room as a private nurse. You can only imagine. The owner's response was blunt. Are you crazy? Leave my office now. Such a stunt, if discovered, would result in the loss of my company's license, and it would be the end of my business. And tell me, Isaac, a middle-aged bearded Hasidic Jew with long side locks doesn't exactly fit anyone's stereotype of a nurse. So this stunt would be soon discovered by everyone else. So what would it take for you to give me credentials as a nurse? Isaac asked. The man tells him, Isaac, you have to go to nursing school. You need a medical education. That could take a few years. Isaac says, well, how do you know if I know the material to hire me as a nurse? Asks this Hasidic young man by the name of Isaac. Is the only way by going to a university and getting a degree? Well, it was this question that hit the jackpot. The owner of the nursing company told Isaac something that only people in that field knew, that as a consequence of severe nursing shortage caused by COVID-19 crisis, New York State just passed a law creating an expedited procedure for certifying licensed practitioner nurses. They call them LPNs. That means if one had the knowledge needed to take a series of online courses and pass a written exam, if he or she passed, they were able to be hired as a nurse in New York City. So here's what a Jewish son did out of the love for his mom. He said, thank you. He went to his family. He bid farewell. He took food and water and he locked himself into his office for 3 days and 3 nights. He didn't leave the office for 3 days, nor did he sleep more than a few hours a night. He studied and restudied all the online courses for LPN certification. Now, as an EMT, he knew some of the basics, which made it a bit easier. After 3 days and 3 nights of studying, Isaac took the exam and passed it with flying colors. He returned to the owner of the company and said, "Okay, sir, I'm a nurse." The guy thought Isaac lost his mind. But as he saw that indeed he passed the exam, the man gave him his certification. Now, armed with this certification, he paid the company to provide a private nurse for his mother. Aha! And who would be the nurse? Her son Isaac. This Hasidic fresh nurse comes to Cornell. They already knew him because he was the nudnik that didn't stop begging them to let him in. But this time, my friends, this time around, he took out the certificate showing them that he was a New York City licensed nurse and he worked for this company that would provide nurses to Cornell, and that the family hired him to be a nurse for Mrs. Rita Goodinger, his mom. They looked at him and said, "Sir, you forged this. You could be arrested. Leave here now." Well, he had them call his boss, who confirmed this was no forgery. Isaac was admitted as a private nurse in Cornell, and he became his mom's private nurse. He was able to provide his mother with the regal and royal care she always bestowed upon others. 3 weeks later, as she began to breathe and came out of her induced coma, she opened her eyes for the first time since Passover to see her beloved Isaac, dressed in the garb of a nurse, standing at her bedside, holding her frail but regal arms, with tears of joy and gratitude streaming down his face. 2.5 months later, she returned home after making a full recovery. Friends, see yourselves as a servant of the Almighty, a conduit for His infinity, a channel for His royalty, an agent of His compassion, and a channel for His love. For even when there is pain, confusion, and uncertainty, I never despair. I am always empowered. I read a story about an Israeli man by the name of Efi Eitam who served in the military as a high-ranking officer. He fought in the front lines of the Yom Kippur War. He was part of the raid on Entebbe. He stared death in the face and many, many times over the years, and he somehow miraculously always survived. But nothing can compare to what happened to him some time ago when he went on a fishing tour in Alaska. He says, "We flew to Anchorage, and from Anchorage by a small airplane to a place called King Salmon. And from King Salmon we flew to the middle of nowhere with merely 6 wooden huts. The scene was unbelievable, with spectacular nature, rivers, lakes, and forests that were splendid. After all my years in war," he says, "I was looking forward to a few days of serenity." Now, their fishing guide, who was an old, experienced man named Billy, he gave them directions. He said, "Look, there's only one animal that could be dangerous out here, and that is the grizzly bear. If a bear will approach you, don't run away. Stand still. Turn your face to the bear and say, 'Hey, bear, this is my place. I want to fish here.'" Effie says he burst out laughing. The grizzly bear will accept these words. I mean, the bears are aware of this ritual. The fishing guide said, "Don't worry. It always worked in the past. It's going to work in this case too." The guide leaves them. A couple of hours later, Effie is all alone, minding his own business, fishing, while eating his tuna sandwich that he brought from Israel. All of a sudden, he hears rustling in the leaves behind him. "I turn around," he says, "and I see a grizzly bear approaching me. He's now some 30 feet from me. I want to run, but I know that grizzly bears run 30 miles an hour. And if I run, he will catch me. If I climb up a tree, he too will climb up it and get me. Well, I had nothing to do but follow the instructions I got. from the fishing guy. So I stood still. I looked the grizzly bear in the eyes and I said, "Hey bear, this is my place. I intend to fish here." And when the bear heard his words, he stood on his hind legs. And then he was able to see that he was huger than when he was standing on his 4 feet. He said, the bear was so tall and big, powerful. Yet I was about to melt from fear. But I continued to say, "Bear, this is my place. I intend to fish here. Bear, this is my place. I came here to fish." And after a few seconds, the bear went downstream and started to fish on his own. After a few days, the guide, Billy, comes back with his propeller airplane to pick them up. And he says, "Billy, you're not going to believe what happened. It worked. Tell me, how does this work? Does the bear understand English?" Billy says, "It's very simple. For the bear, you're a human being. You are the nature. You are the crown of nature. And he will never think about you as food. You are the king of the world. And unless you behave like an animal, you are prowling, you're running, you're screaming, you're bleeding, then he loses his respect for you and sees you as an equal or as a competitor. But when you stand tall and he hears the human voice, he will never, ever attack." Friends, each of us during these times must face our own grizzly bears. It may be anger, trauma, depression, sadness, maybe loneliness or despair, anxiety, loss. What do? It was King Solomon, the wisest of all men, gave perspective. He said, when you feel these powerful negative emotions come over you, the most important rule to remember is not to leave your sacred space. Remember who you are. You are you. You are someone who is carved in the image of God. Beneath all the layers of fear, of self-doubt, and insecurities, there is this powerful infinite light. And if we can tap into that and feel our gut, then we will have confidence to take a stand and face our bears and remain the royals we were destined to be. So, on this Rosh Hashanah, we coronate the king and the king inside of us. I ask of you to think of royalty. You may feel fearful, anxious, but let us start this new year as royals and charge forward. Ask yourself how you will turn this period in your life into your greatest and brightest shining moments. Perhaps stripped from many facades and distractions, you can now turn your marriage into a real success story. You can really work on yourself and on your relationship with your children or other loved ones. You can reevaluate who you are as a person and as a Jew and discover a far deeper relationship with God. Friends, let's do great things together. Let's not be victims of COVID-19, but creators of a better world. Use this time to take on initiative, a project, a venture, to bring light into others, in your family, in your community, in your country, and in your world. I would suggest for each of us to take on a new project in our lives. Think of a way you can infuse a new spirit into your kids' education and school experience. How you can infuse your home with more Torah and Judaism. Embrace one new mitzvah in your daily life. Maybe start wrapping tefillin, fix a mezuzah on your home. Maybe build a sukkah this year in your home. How about creating a Zoom Torah class for your family or friends? Phone at least one lonely person daily to offer words of encouragement, love, and hope. Let's be creators of a better world. I would like to conclude with one final moving story. It's a story about a young family, Alan, Sherry, and Lisa Lustman. Lisa, their daughter, was only 6 years old, and she was attending a Hebrew school. But she attended only because her friend was going, and Lisa wanted to go as well, figuring that she would simply come home with harmless Hanukkah cookies and cute Dip the Apple and the Honey songs, Lisa's parents weren't prepared for the excitement which their little girl took to everything she was learning. Lisa's dad, Alan, in particular, he was content with his lifestyle. He wasn't interested in having routine altered his life or changed in any way. He was happy with his limited knowledge of Hebrew and Jewish concepts. And that was the extent of what he wanted for his child. So it was starting to get on his nerves when Lisa would go on about the Torah portion, this mitzvah, what she learned in Hebrew school, or that traditions. And at times, she came home, they had to try and temper her enthusiasm for her Jewish studies because it was simply really not where they wanted to be. One day, as Passover was approaching, Lisa came bursting through the door with a smile from ear to ear, holding up her most recent project, a painted plastic cup of Elijah. Little Lisa said, Mommy, can we use it at our Passover Seder? Lisa's mom, Sherry, pretended to be excited. She oohed, then she ahed over her daughter's work of art and assured that they would certainly use it for their Seder. Yet there was one problem. They really were not planning to have a Passover Seder. Sherry knew that her husband, Alan, would not really be interested in having one, let alone allowing their daughter to become emotionally involved in another religious experience. Even so, Sherry did not want to deflate her daughter's Passover balloon, which was flying high, especially with her handcrafted cup of Elijah. As predicted, Alan was not up for the Seder idea. But his daughter listened from a distance to the conversation he and his wife were having. He couldn't help but be moved by her innocent desire for a Seder. So he reluctantly agreed, hoping that Lisa would not expect the same ceremony every year. This must be a one-time thing. When Sherry told their daughter that they would, in fact, be displaying her beautiful cup at the Seder, Lisa's smile was almost too wide for her tiny little face to hold. The night finally arrived. Alan did his best to play his role. He even put on a kippah for the occasion. And when urged by his wife to try to get into it and be animated about the steps, he again questioned the wisdom of going along with this whole charade. But how can I turn a cold shoulder to his daughter's smile? Well, he made the blessings on the wine. He pretended to care about the 4 questions that Lisa read from her sheet and listened as she sang the Dayenu, Dayenu song. He did the dipping, he ate some lettuce and horseradish. He crunched down on some of the matzah, and they had a full Passover meal. Now the hour was getting late, and Alan finally stood up and he told his wife and daughter he was going to sleep. Little Lisa piped up, "But what about the cup of Elijah?" she cried out. She was looking towards her mother, anxiously for support. Now at this point, you can imagine, Alan was at his wit's end. In his mind, he had gone beyond the call of duty. He had played the Passover game long enough, and he was tired and just simply wanted to go to sleep. To him, Elijah was no more of a reality than the tooth fairy. Allowing his child to think otherwise was one thing, but he had enough of playing along. He was simply fed up. He said, "That's it." He announced, "I'm going upstairs. I got to wake up tomorrow morning early. I got a busy day ahead of me." When Lisa started to mouth another protest about Elijah, Alan lost it. He grabbed the cup of Elijah that his daughter made as an arts and craft project, and to his daughter's horror, he threw it to the floor, and he stepped on it and crushed it, and he darted off. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Alan had been twisting and turning since getting into bed, unable to sleep. He felt terrible what he did, about what happened earlier that evening. How could I have done that? He got out of bed to check on his little girl. But when he looked into his daughter's bedroom, he was surprised to see her bed was empty. Slowly, he walked downstairs to see where she had fallen asleep. But as he reached the bottom of the stairs and walked into the living room, his heart nearly broke. There little Lisa stood, her face pressed up against the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked up towards him. "What's wrong, Lisa? Why are you up?" Lisa didn't answer. She just pointed out the window. "What is it, Lisa?" Alan asked. "What are you looking at? Why don't you go back to sleep?" "Daddy, don't you see him? Daddy, don't you see him? He's waiting right there by the door for us to open it for him." She then turned back towards her father and fell into his arms, sobbing deeply. Alan cried along with her. Shaking his head in disbelief, he looked out the window, and he would later say, "Although I saw nothing at that moment, I believe with all my heart that she really did see him. I believe that my precious girl saw Elijah." Indeed, that ice-melting moment proved to be a profound turning point for the Lustman family, as Alan and Sherry adopted a new openness to living a Jewish life. My dear friends, if we can only all let our guards down just a bit and return to that sweet state of innocence, perhaps we too can have that vision of Elijah at our doorsteps. Perhaps within the sounding of the shofar this year, we will hear the promise of a new world. And if we can envision it with clarity and faith, if we can hear it and see it, he will come. It's up to you and I to make it happen. Friends, it will come a day when our grandchildren will ask us, was 2020 the worst of times or the best of times? The answer depends on you and me. If 2020 will have brought out the best in you, the best in me, and the best in us, it will help. If it's going to help us tap into our inner royal infinity, a challenging time will have become the best of times. May this new year be one filled with meaning and purpose, peace and tranquility, love and harmony, inner joy and happiness. And may we merit to see the time when the glory of God will fill this world with the era of redemption upon us. Shana Tova, and a happy and healthy, sweet new year to Ya'al.